Hi everyone, it's high time I actually covered some Chess Olympiad action. So we're into round 6 already of the 44th Chess Olympiad. It's going on in India, and I'm looking in this video at a game that Magnus Carlsen played with the black pieces here against Anton Smirnov, an Australian chess grandmaster, only 21 years old, very dangerous player. So let's see what happened here. Magnus had black. We had e4 on the board, and now this is the first interesting moment. Magnus goes knight c6, which is apparently called the Nc6 defense. So he loves to just get off the beaten track. I mean, you often see stronger players doing this. When they're playing weaker ones, they want to get away from opening theory, mix up the position. Now we had knight f3, pawn d6 was the follow-up, pawn d4 claims the centre, knight f6 from Magnus, so really provocative stuff. And now here we just had knight c3 defending this pawn. If you start trying to kick on with this centre, this isn't ideal, for example, because then the queens are coming off, something like this. And if you kicked on with, say, pawn d5 here, well then again you get a really kind of tense tactical struggle, something like this. Magnus maybe knows the pawn structure a bit better. Who knows what he's got up his sleeve. So white just maintains the centre, knight c3, good move. As long as you can maintain these pawns, you're going to slowly suffocate black. So this is one of the strategic battles now. We now had pawn g6 from Magnus, now pawn h3, bishop g7, bishop e3, castles, and now queen d2. White's preparing to castle queenside, get that classic kingside attack going. So Magnus has to counter. He goes a6, preparing b5 later. Now the bishop came to d3, good developing move. Pawn e5 now from Magnus, and this is a really nice thematic break. So he chips away at that white centre. Now if you kick on here with d5, sorry about the noise outside, let me actually close a window here. Got some combine harvester or something going past. So if you close the centre with d5 here, well then the knight can come back to e7 and you get this classic kind of King's Indian play here. You can go c6 soon, or maybe pawn f5 at the right moment when this moves out of the way. So instead of closing the centre, we had takes on e5 here, the knight recaptured, knight takes, pawn takes. So the pawn structure's been clarified, white castles queenside, and they're definitely better here already because it's quite tough for black to actually get these queenside pawns going in a good way. Now we'll see Magnus goes b5, but this now gives up this big c5 square. That's one of the challenges. But if you don't go b5, say you try b6, well then the d5 square looks pretty nasty. This wouldn't be such a great pawn structure. So you kind of have to concede something to get play going. But after pawn b5, g4 from white, well now Magnus goes c6 because he wants to cover the d5 square, and white goes f3, preparing h4, and you just feel that the white attack is a bit more dangerous here in this position. So Magnus goes bishop e6, developing, pawn h4, good move. That's why f3 was played, to protect this pawn. Magnus goes queen a5 now, so looking down here, and so white just takes a moment to cover that one, pawn to a3, and now Magnus plays an imprecise move here. So he should go h5 immediately. We do see him do this in the game, because it stops white from going h5, which is a dangerous break. But what we see in the game is rook f to b8, and now white misses a shot. h5 is the best move to really liberate this rook, stop black from ever doing that one. And if b4, for example, well there's actually this knight b1 move, nice defensive resource. This pawn's now pinned to the queen here, and if you kick on with, say, c5, well we can take here, pawn recaptures, and queen e2 is a really nice nudge to the side. It switches plans, it gets rid of this battery, and actually now focuses on this c4 square control here. And black doesn't really have so much of an attack. Say you take here, the knight recaptures. One of the problems is that this dark square bishop isn't playing in the attack, it's blocked by the pawn. So this was the best way for white to go, really, was to already go h5 when Magnus gave the chance. But after this rook f to b8 move, white just blinks and goes bishop to c5. Yes, it covers here, but now Magnus can get h5 in, and this is an important defensive break. Although you don't often want to push pawns in front of your king, here it's justified because if captures like this, we take with the knight and we're actually covering these squares pretty well. And if you kick on, well, similar story, you've actually closed down your attack and now black can turn their attention to the queen side. So the tension was maintained. We had bishop to d6 here, but this isn't such a great move because it actually improves this rook and you're not actually threatening to win this pawn because then there's the tactical shot of pawn to b4. You open up the queen attacking here, plus you threaten to take the knight, and if you try this one, well then we can take back with the bishop, and there's a massive mating attack actually coming on the king here. Say something like this, that's immediate mate. If the knight moves away, well you can see it's just falling to pieces. You can even crash through like this here, king takes, pawn takes, etc. So that's why we didn't have this one back here, the bishop taking on e5. Instead, this king just nudged to the side. Now rook d8, pressures this bishop, it drops back into b4, hits that queen, and now Magnus is threatening c5 here, but knight to e2 is a nice response, because now if you go c5, there's bishop a5 skewering these two pieces. You opened up the queen's support when you moved the knight, so that's why rook d7 gets off that skewer, and that's why the bishop comes back to c5, stops the c5 break. And now at this point, Magnus decides to take on g4. He could have done it sooner, but he does it now, and white doesn't recapture that pawn. If you do so, I know it's attacked by two pieces here, but actually even stronger is knight takes on e4, using this pin, plus you're now hitting this dark squared bishop, not good for white. So instead knight g3 was played, gambiting another pawn, protecting e4, supporting h5. Nice try from white here, generating an attack. So Magnus takes on f3. Best move. He allows this pawn h5 stuff, and now his defensive understanding is just superb here. So he goes queen to d8, and what he's anticipating is that if white goes pawn h6, well now you drop back the bishop. If it carries on with check, well now you can go to h8, use the enemy's pawn as a shield here, and now because you drops the queen back to d8, it holds the bishop in a line like this. Yes, queen g5 could come, hit here, the queen could defend, you lose a pawn, but long story short, this is actually better for black here. They can now turn their attention to the queen side attack. It's a really strange looking position for the king, but actually it's quite safe, the pawn shielding it. So coming back here, we didn't have h6 played by white. Instead, takes on g6 was played, the pawn recaptured, now queen to g5, but again, just such calm defensive technique from Magnus. King to f7 played, just holds this pawn and says to white, okay, what's your next move? And when you run this with the engines, they want queen e3 as the best response, just trying to hold firm. And the position remains tactical, but you feel that it's probably easier for black to play now with moves like a5, b4 potentially on the cards. You've got good pressure down the d file. If you're not breaking through on the king side, then what are you doing? You're material down and you're going to be defending. So white just goes for it now. They play knight to f5. Really nice idea to try and mix up the position. Now Magnus didn't take that one, although it is possible, but you have to find kind of computery defense, because after the rook comes here, attacking your bishop, well then you have to go king to e8, opening up the rooks to defend, and after check, rook f7, but it looks kind of scary from a human perspective to be maneuvering your king like this. There could be loose pieces around here, you know, pretty scary, tough to calculate. So instead of taking that knight, Magnus takes on e4 instead, and now if recaptures, which we didn't see in the game, well the problem is then the rook's coming off the board, but also this is just devastating. You can't even move your king here, queen comes back, and black's of course just massive material ahead. So that's why you can't actually take the knight on e4, there's a pin down the d file, so instead the check came here. The bishop captured, you have to chop off that powerful knight. Queen captures on h6, and now bishop f5 from Magnus just glues everything together, covers the knight, and this check's not actually leading anywhere because the king can duck into e6, everything's solid. So we didn't have the check, and the best move from white here was actually this nudge to the side of rook to c1. I mean, so tough to see in time trouble as the players were now, but the whole idea is that now you're threatening to eliminate the knight, but the rooks won't be coming off the board here. What we see in the game was king to a2, but now after this great move by Magnus, queen g8, covering everything here, also opening up this discovered check, well, when the bishop captures on e4, which we do see, now when Magnus recaptures, white spends a tempo moving the rook to the side here, a tempo which could have already been spent in the previous position, because you don't want the rooks coming off the board, you need them to try and generate an attack on the black king. Otherwise, as we see here, you're just 3 pawns down, very significant material deficit. So king f6 check now played by Magnus. This is the beautiful kind of super glue move. You check the king and everything just comes together now, because after pawn b3, the rook slides across and the queen is just getting evacuated here. Now a pair of rooks come off the board. Rook recaptures, queen d5, king b2, and this is really just a matter of technique now for Magnus because the attack has fizzled out. So rook to d7 played, rook h8, bishop f5 nudges back, and yes, you get a check in here, but rook f7 covers everything, the rook hops back, queen e4, the queen ducks away, king g7, and after bishop f2, queen e2, here white resigned because you can't avoid getting the queens off the board or losing your bishop, and then these pawns are going to simply win the game. So a great game by Magnus, and Norway actually lost the match though, because although Magnus won, Tari lost, so did John Ludwig Hammer to opponents rated quite a bit lower than them, and then there was a draw on the final board, so an excellent result for Australia. The other player to watch, by the way, is D. Gukesh. He is just absolutely killing it this tournament, as he has been all year, so I'll have to come with some of his games soon. Thanks very much for watching. To watch another epic Magnus game, click here, and subscribe to the channel to never miss another video. Do see below, and see you soon.